Okay, we welcome you to our afternoon session on offering short communications. Our first short communication will be offered by Bruce Morrill on his current book project, Faith's Unfinished Business, A Mystical-Political Theology of Easter. Welcome, Bruce.
Thank you for the opportunity, and thanks for showing up to listen. The origin of the project and the title, Faith's Unfinished Business, whether I can stick with that ultimately is another question, depending on the publisher. But the origin of the project, most fundamentally, was my co-teaching a course at my university, my School of Theology or Divinity in Nashville at Vanderbilt University. Vanderbilt Divinity School, the University Divinity School, is not only ecumenical, but trying to be interreligious. And one of our two New Testament professors, in fact, was a Jewish scholar, Amy Jill Levine. And A.J. Levine she just retired during COVID, so I have it in the past tense now. A.J. Levine, every other year, asked one of her colleagues to co-teach a course on Jewish-Christian relations. And in time flies, I guess it was spring of 2014, I did that with her. And one of the and the course, she's a scholar of the New Testament and history. One of the fascinating and frustrating aspects of doing this with her was she told me she has no interest in theology. And I said, well, I'm a theologian. How are we going to make, how's this going to work? But you want to cooperate, you want to help. And so we have about 25 students. And here's the point. All of those students, with the exception of 2, were Christian. And our divinity school largely draws from the 8 states, Tennessee and Tennessee's big, and the other 7 states around it. So kind of biblical fundamentalist backgrounds, a lot of them. They're trying to recover from churches like that. And that's makes for a fascinating student body. Well, one of the things that became clear to me over those 14 weeks, maybe 2/3 of the way through, was how much in history, especially the medieval period, I'm just trying to give a short introduction, and currently, Christians approached the story of salvation effectively as something that was done, that was accomplished. Yeah? But in a way that isn't helpful. In other words, and I started to reflect on this a lot, that there was nothing left to be done except for individuals to decide to follow Jesus or not, right? So of course this becomes very sharp in the medieval period and all the horrible crap that people did to the Jews in different places and all that. But I found even as I would try to engage the students, it wasn't just difficult with my colleague AJ, but try to engage these Christian students with notions that, well, the Spirit of God raising Christ Jesus from the dead is the beginning of something, not the conclusion. Everybody was just like, this woke me up, huh? How much this notion was entrenched. Such that then I thought, oh, well, then no wonder it's such an individualistic approach. And I would venture to guess that if there had been Roman Catholic students in the room, they would have been right along in the same line, largely. Yeah. Now, some of you kindly know me and even read some of the stuff I write. So, from when I did my dissertation that became my earliest full-length book, eschatology has always been really important in my thought. So that really is what this book is going to try to do, and that is to pursue in a sense, a practical eschatology. That kind of terminology might sell 2 copies, and one would be returned. So I thought there's got to be, but this notion of incomplete, and so in American lingo, we'll talk about, well, this is unfinished business. We've got to get this finished, So that's the inspiration of faith's unfinished business. And the word faith became so important to me precisely because I realized, not only from working with A.J. Levine that semester, and we would talk other times too, we're on the same faculty, but previously I taught for 15 years at Boston College in the theology department, where Ruth Langer was a scholar of Judaism. She's a rabbi and a historian. And Ruth would emphasize with me, and it might be unique to her perspective, I'm not sure, but I'm not certain, but she would emphasize to me that the word faith was a Christian word, and it didn't work in interreligious dialogue, and it didn't work in dialogue with her or with Jewish people. And that made a lot of sense to me. It made a lot of the power of any one symbol, like the symbol faith, So I thought there's something about claiming the word faith as a Christian that my dialogue with the other was forcing me to interrogate more carefully. So faith's unfinished business. Now, about the Easter season, so I thought, Easter is the beginning of something, it's not the end. And yet the other way in which Christians, not only Roman Catholics, and some of you also know all my stories. My mother was Russian Orthodox, her family were Carpathian Russian immigrants and all. So I, Catholicism and Orthodoxy I know, but I also discovered with increasing numbers of Protestants in the U.S., great enthusiasm for the season of Lent, yes? And all the more that reinforces Easter as the completion. So, there's a real way in which it's even embodied, yes? What did you give up for Lent? When did you give up for Lent? That kind of stuff. Sorry if that was disrespectful. And I over time, I kept thinking, well, Easter's 50 days. It outpaces Lent by 10. And of course, I know, why these numbers and things. So the reason I want to focus on the entire Easter season somehow is to open it out and to acknowledge, what do I mean? To acknowledge from the start that Lent works so well ritually because it's so specifically goal-oriented. You got a target date, you're going to do this until that date, right? This is, deadlines. It's the writer's best friend, at least mine. But you're going to, it's done. Whereas the 50th day of Easter, Pentecost, is precisely telling the church to be church. It's open-ended, yes? So the other thing that converges in what I want to do when I say a mystical political theology of Easter, mystical political, that again is the language of Schillebeeckx and Metz, who influenced me so much and still do. That terminology is another terminology for practical. But I think it's provocative enough that, people might like, what the hell's going on in this book? Heck, recorded and, not recorded, okay. So I have found in my 30 years as a priest, as of June 20th, this Monday, that I find throughout the Easter season, I focus my preaching on the second reading. Acts of the Apostles, now it doesn't mean I ignore the other two, right? But Acts of the Apostles is a very complicated and troubling book if people don't understand it, right? Because the language, if you watch it a lot in the speeches and so forth, still is very negative about the Jews. Yes? And at least in the world I live and try to do the pastoral, when my homily exceeds 10 minutes, I'm in big trouble. So in other words, what can one really achieve? Right? I'm not going to start lecturing on Acts of the Apostles and so forth. And I find myself, just speaking personally, that the Johannine passages from the so-called last discourse, I find those very contemplative and meditative, but I don't find them easy to preach on. I know a lot of people do, but I don't. I love to preach on the second reading. The first letter of Peter, many scholars argue, and I like the argument, so I want to go with them, that it was a baptismal catechesis. And even if it wasn't, okay, but it functions this way. The first letter of John, I just think is powerful, and that the lectionary selections are very good because it's the practical thing. A lot of the things that appear in the Johannine Passion and the last discourse get reiterated, things that might be not paragraphs, but quite lengthy, right, in John, in the first letter of John are stated in single blunt sentences. Such as the great ones, anyone who says they love God and hate their neighbor is a liar. Yeah? Okay, you got 1 Peter, you got 1 John, and then the book of Revelation. It's the only time over 3 years that Roman Church and other Catholic churches perhaps, and then other churches, Lutherans, others who use the common lectionary, it's the only time we hear from the book of Revelation selections in a sustained way. So I especially, my tail's really wagging when we get to this year that we just finished, even though I traveled this whole time and didn't do anything, to be able to do that, to preach on the book of Revelation. Why, finally? Those 3 books, I find, really present what it is to live the faith of Easter. Stories about Jesus walking through walls and all that stuff, that's fine. It's powerful in the best sense of the word, mythology, symbolism, everything. It's, again, I'm not opposing symbol and reality. That's the last thing. That's what I argue against. But when we get into these 3 books, so as I've started organizing them finally, the way the book would lay out is that it's going to have this very personal introduction I just gave you from my teaching and all that stuff. And then as vice president of the NAAL years ago, I gave the talk on Lent and the problem. So thank God this one's in the bank and I can kind of work it out. And then a large part of the book will be 3 chapters. And I'm granting this is a construction, but my degree is in systematics, that each of these, as I deal with each of these 3 books, I will lean hard on each one, or emphasize in each one of the 3 theological virtues: faith, hope, and love. And 1 Peter is strong on hope. Of course, 1 John is strong on love. And I think the book of Revelation is a tour de force on faith. People might think right away, oh, well, that's the one that you have to have hope and stuff. I'm going to go a different route. Like I say, it's a construction. So I'm going to do this, and then in the last part of the book, probably one, but I'm not sure yet, chapter, do relate it to the sacraments as I would like to think Easter reveals them. So first of all, that Basil the Great and others are attributed with saying things like, Easter is a week of Sundays, right? It's the 8th day multiplied, that kind of thing. That I like to think that Easter as a full season is the season that helps reveal better to us what we do every Sunday. That's an argument. I'm not claiming, it's just an argument, my argument. And I suppose one could say it boils down then to a certain spirituality, but I've so graced already in many ways with this morning's session content, again, a pastoral or pastoral of Easter. What sacraments and so forth. I mean, a lot about the Eucharist, obviously. Baptism, well, would have happened at, how Easter Vigil. But I've long advocated, and this is shouting into the wind, but, whatever. I really think that is the season during the church year when it would be good for communities to do on a Sunday, one of the Easter Sundays, the anointing of the sick. May the Lord save you and raise you up. It's the very words in Greek in James that are the same words about what God did for Jesus. It's not penitential, right? And then, of course, parishes like crazy do first communions and confirmations and all. But to try to talk about what new or further perspective might we have on these sacraments in light of what I just described. So that's the conception of the book. The good news for me is that I have a sabbatical this fall, a scheduled sabbatical at Vanderbilt. I am in a very enviable position. After every 6 semesters, you get a semester for research and writing. And in the spring, with great gratitude, I'll be at Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles, and they're visiting Jesuit fellowship, which will afford me more time. So wish me luck in how far I get. But that's the project, and I just would close by saying, I've been in this game long enough to realize this is not going to necessarily have any big impact, in the way liturgy is done or understood. But it will have an impact with a certain small number of people who read my stuff, or it might have a multiplier effect. What I'm trying to say is that it's a way of writing a theology, yeah? And I look forward, I've long wanted to do it. Remember I said it was 2014, but other things keep coming up, right? Now we're gonna do it. And hope that it'll be something that at least is thoughtful and inspiring for somebody, yeah. So that's it, yep.
Let me pass the microphone because we actually are live streaming this.
Well, that's great. I think I only used nasty language twice. So.
I think you did okay.
Sign of the Spirit.
Thank you. I'll refrain from nasty language altogether, maybe. No, I was just intrigued by what you said about Ruth Langer and why she said faith is not a good category for dialogue with the Jews and others. It just intrigued me.
Right, yeah. Why would she think that faith is not... as best I could understand from her and remember, she said for her, it was too Christian a word. That's the most basic answer. And that alerted me, again, to how a word I can take, or I think we take for granted, can sound so differently to someone else. She heard it as such a Christian word that she cannot use it as a Jew. That's the most basic answer. And I tried, as I can recall at least, I tried to dialogue, but don't you, and if I define for you what we mean by faith, et cetera, that wasn't working. That just didn't, no, that's not the point. It's just historically, this is a word that's been used against Jews that we obstinately don't have faith, and therefore, or we reject the faith, and therefore faith is off the table.
Bruce, I've come in contact with Amy, what's her second name?
Amy Jill Levine.
Levine. And I've heard her speak on the relationship between
and Jews?
Jewish scriptures and as Christian. And amazing, she's a wonderful speaker. So I wanted to ask more, how did she influence you more than just that word faith? as being too Christian a word, or?
No, the faith word was Ruth Langer, not A.J. Levine. But how A.J. influenced me was just the experience of doing a 14-week full course and realizing that the way Christians have historically understood what it is to have the faith is largely, it's a generalization, but largely a statement that God has fulfilled everything. And that's the key. And so when I learned in much more detail than I ever knew about the whole medieval thing, how Jews were treated in Spain and Central Europe, all that stuff, right? And so forth, the answer would be, it's all very obvious. God raised Jesus from the dead. There were those debates that happened in what's now Spain in the 1500s. I'm terrible on dates, right? But between Jewish scholars or Jewish rabbis and Dominicans. And I forget in which city in what's now Spain these were held, but even the monarch presided over them. And so we read these texts, and a lot of the arguments boiled down to the highly intelligent rabbis saying, well, you keep saying that everything has been healed, people are sick all the time. You keep saying it's a new creation, and a horrible storm came through and wiped out a crop. So what are you talking about? And that's a powerful question. And the irony is that when you look at those debates, really, the Christians, I'm not trying to pick on Dominicans, they really didn't have good answers to that. But then the king always ruled that they won the debate because they were the Christians. So that's the kind of issue. And I found that as I listened to the students and reflected on my own experience, contemporary, it's not that different. And we think about Easter hymns, at least in English, and there can be a lot of language. We American Catholics adopted basically Anglican and Methodist hymnody. I think it's safe to say a lot of our Easter, hymns. Jake Emperor used to call them Easter carols, which I thought was kind of insightful in a way. They use all this language of, the strife is over, the total victory has happened. And I thought, it makes it all into a kind of fairy tale, when in fact, it's only begun. Yeah, so. And that's the good news, actually. So, thanks.
Thank you, Bruce. Our next short communication will be offered by Lalo Ponce from the province of Chile. The title of his short communications is Liturgical Adaptations During the Time of Pandemic. The pastoral and sacramental questions that they present.
What do you prefer, a good Spanish or a bad English? What do you prefer, good Spanish or a bad English, Charles? Bad English, really? Be prepared. I was wondering if this short communication is pastoral communication. But what I want to share with you, I suppose, is not something really special or particular in my experience, but we share it because most of us, I'm sure, we did with these things similar, trying to cope with the challenge that pandemia was setting in front of us. To me, there is two big remarks I would like to say, and two questions that remains as important. Not all the Jesuits we communicate during pandemic were we do agree with what we should do, because some of us we celebrate Mass broadcasted by WhatsApp or Zoom or whatsoever. And the other one, they didn't like it, especially talking, because at the moment of consecration, the communion especially, the one who was celebrated, we feel that was very strong. And it was a very bad feeling that came to us, because you communicate alone. You see, it has no meaning to celebrate the Mass broadcast by Zoom. But what it came out, and it was a good experience for us Jesuits, Latin American Jesuits, with no experience of churches from the the Reform. For most of us, it was very interesting to discover for the first time the liturgy of the Word, how deep it can be, the liturgy of the Word. And while we were celebrating with many families, for the families, it was also a wonderful experience to share the Word of God. Though it was led by a priest, most of those liturgies were led by the mama or the papa or the grandmother at the houses. And for them was something beautiful and deep. And not just because of the communication among them, but because the spiritual fruits it came and how much they were closed. It was something beautiful that enables us to say, thanks to God, we have the pandemic. The other things was, while we were facing and approaching the Christmas celebration, we say, what can we do? Because most of the families we were accompanying, going along with in the celebration, ask for the communion, for the form, for the consecrated form. They say, how can we get it? How can we go and communicate? Because celebrate the nativity without communion, the body of Christ, it's too strong for us not to do it. So in Chile, we have a beautiful, popular practice, religious practice. It's called Quasimodo. Correr Quasimodo, to run Quasimodo. It goes back constantly since the colonial times, that people goes with the priest to give the communion to people who are sick and far away from the parish, that were not able to attend the Easter feast. So we start to think how to do it. So why don't we repeat the experience to bring in a little Chinese boxes? Chinese are always doing things very cheap also. Like PCDs, We celebrate a Mass that we broadcast also by Zoom, saying the family, look, this is going to be the Eucharist. You will get if you want to receive it. So we did it 2 weeks before Christmas. So the family put the little box in the crèche, waiting for the moment. So the family did it as a very beautiful, because people are used to do that in Chile, to prepare some special places to receive the priest, receive the communion. They call it un altar familiar, familiar altar. So when we were by Zoom celebrating the Mass, at the moment of the communion, the eldest of the family stood up and took the communion and gave the communion to all the people. What was interesting was that for them, it was something new and deep in meaning to gather the family and to give the bread of God. And that for them was, most of them they told me, and I was the one to give it to my family as I do every day, to share the body of Christ. It took different meanings that we were not planning to communicate in that sense. They gave it that meaning. It was beautiful. For most of them, they say, look, to me, this experience has been also a way of celebrating the born of Christ in my family. It was incredible, that. But also we were thinking, and I would like to share that with you also, it was that one big question rise up, thanks of the COVID pandemic. It is the question, the issue of the presence. What do we mean with presence? To be present at. What is the importance of the body, our body, and our we to be a body? Because I have friends that say to me, look, be careful that the church is going back or staying behind the new technologies, because why don't you give the absolution by internet? If someone wants to be confessed, they say, well, it cannot, it's not allowed. But be aware of what is going on technology, because for young people, presence is not what it is present for you. To be present is not the same thing. It has different meaning these days. So I didn't have any answer to that. Most of the time I say, well, blah, blah, blah. But I knew that I was feeling without real deep answers to talk about, to dialogue with young people about this. But we know now that technologies brings us incredible possibilities and some other restraints also. But we have to face it and to give real answer for the people who are looking for those real answers. What we think, the question of being present at and the importance of body is two big issues we have to face. Thank you.
Thank you, Lola. I have two comments. One of them is, in the parish that I met, which is now many, many people coming back, but there's still the live Zoom on Sunday morning. I am supposed to stand up after communion and read a prayer of spiritual communion for those who cannot receive. Since I cannot receive you now sacramentally, I ask that you come spiritually into my heart. And I'm having a problem deciphering precisely what that means. You know, I've tried doing we share with you spiritually, or something like that. But what does it mean for people at home? Okay, that's the second one. And the second point is, I don't know, I felt moved to do this myself, is that I had a problem, receiving communion, then drinking all the wine myself, and then having communion. So the deacon and I, what we do is, we long for the day when we will once again share this covenant cup together. Until that time, and in your person, the blood of Christ. And I see people will nod that there's some kind of connection. And I extended that at a funeral recently where the husband of 54 years who had carried his wife's remains is up there at the Eucharistic prayer, and I thought, he should drink the covenant cup instead of me. And so during the Kiss of Peace, I asked him, and he said, absolutely. He came up, and I said, as a sign of their covenant love, Donald received the blood of Christ. And he drank the whole, and you could hear this audible, because if we don't keep that connection, during this time, we're going to have a lot more work to do. Because what I hear at my school is, well, we're not going to even deal with intinction yet or anything, because you know that if you receive from the bread, you've received. And they forget the next paragraph, which says, but for the fuller sign. So anyway, those are two comments. But any comments on spiritual communion? If anybody has, I would love it. I'm not sure I know what it means. I'm not sure it's bad, but I don't know what it means.
You're behind.
Just to respond to you, Paul, to that question on spiritual communion, I have an article about spiritual communion in the most recent issue of Worship, because it kind of relates to my topic of baptism of desire. So you can take a look at that, and it's a complicated topic. So.
Your comments about people receiving at home and the celebrant feeling incomplete when he received communion. Let me narrate a story that happened when I was trying to live stream masses when nobody could come to the church, because at one point in our county, the churches were closed. They could not come to gatherings. And one person, an older gentleman, kept on asking me, well, what happens, what if I got hosts by Amazon and I held them up in front of the computer screen when you say the words?
Exactly.
Would that work? We think that the older generation, older than me, older than the hills, but it would understand that there has to be a physical presence. But with Zoom, things have changed drastically, and so I had repeated conversations by email trying to say, no, that's not the way it works. But it's just a comment on your practice. It did happen over in the United States as well.
But I used to say, look, contact, ask for fact. If you want to make love, you can do it by Zoom.
Well, some try.
You need your body. And Eucharist is the sacrament of love of God. So there is some incarnation that it's needed. This is one of the answers I have there.
Please shut me up if I go too long, because these are issues that I really have thought of. I'm sure all of us have thought about these issues. There are a number of important, I think very important theological, pastoral questions that come up with regard to this. What's the nature of an assembly? What does that mean? And doesn't it require physical presence? So, and rethinking what presence means. I understand what you're saying about the youth, and that for this new generation of people, presence is what's on the screen. But I'm not so sure that that's a very healthy thing. So I think we have to think more about that, and whether we should say that it's good or not. I'm inclined to say no. The whole question of live-streamed masses, I just find so difficult to deal with. I'm going to throw Tony under the bus, I think, in a moment, because Tony had a very fine article, I thought, in America about the question of live-streamed masses. I'll give you one example. When I was, during the last year ago in spring, I was asked by a group, prayer group that had been together for years to give them a retreat, a prayer group from Cambridge, Mass. And they wanted a Eucharist. And I fretted and mulled and thought about this. And finally, I agreed to do it, but I would not do it alone, nor would I ever receive communion alone in those circumstances. I asked some of the, now luckily I live in a small community. I was able to ask some of the scholastics to be with me, to video it. And we did it in a chapel, not across my desk or something like that. Otherwise, many did, I know. And I have a lot of problems with that. But I refused to do it alone. I just thought that was just so counter. And the last thing I'll say, sorry for going so long, is this whole question of the connection between communion and the offering of the Eucharistic sacrifice, which the Church makes quite clear, in this not bringing communion from the tabernacle. And I think that is absolutely lost on the vast majority of our people. That connection, that the Eucharist is an activity as much as it is an object. It's an activity as much as it is an object. And our contemporary consumerism just plays into objectifying the Eucharist. One last comment. And I was telling this, I think, to Kevin Irwin earlier today. Our Archdiocese of Boston is just completing a Eucharistic year, or Year of the Eucharist. And the video they put out to introduce it had a number of images. All of the images were either of the tabernacle or of the monstrance. Nothing to do with celebration. Disaster, theologically, pastorally, a disaster, in my opinion. Emphasizing, I'm all for tabernacles and monstrances, don't get me wrong, but emphasizing the wrong approach to the Eucharist. So I'll shut up because I could go on forever. But I'll throw Tony under the bus.
Well, one thing I would say is that your experience in practice kind of validates, I think, one of the things I was trying to argue for in the article, which is in America, which is, and then I draw it out a little bit more theologically in the worship article, but it's that the Eucharist and the celebration of the Eucharist is something that's irreducible. It can't be reduced to the sum of its parts. And so I'm pushing back there against the res sacramentum distinction. And I want to propose kind of an alternative framework to that scholastic terminology. But that it's an irreducible good, but that you can identify sort of secondary goods that can be drawn from it. And some of those goods, like, the instruction that we would get through the liturgy of the word, say, can be conveyed through technological means. Others of them, the good of assembling, when you're not, to me it seems if you don't actually assemble, you're not an assembly. But that those sorts of goods, the goods that associated with a body, for example, can't be conveyed through Zoom or the sort of technologies that we've been using. And so practically, what it seems to me that we should do, should have done, maybe should do. It's not, it's not the end of the story. Is sort of play to our strengths rather than just put everything online, which is, well, everything is going online, so we'll put all of our stuff online too. We'll just put the Mass online. But would be to say the liturgy of the Word works not badly. So why don't we put the Liturgy of the Word online? This may require a certain amount of creativity. It may mean, we wouldn't be necessarily limited even to Mass. Why not the Liturgy of the Word? Why not explore? I think perhaps an Ignatian meditation could work in a certain way. But then draw the line at the Eucharist and say this is not something that really translates. And it seems to me that a certain amount of, asceticism, restraint, would actually convey what we believe about the Eucharist better than just, we'll put everything online. And what you're saying about the Liturgy of the Word really coming out is actually, I think, that validates what I was trying to get at in the article. And, it can help us. There's a lot. I remember maybe the last conference that we were at in one of the discussions, somebody said, we try to do everything at Mass. And we just try to cram everything into Mass. And this might be an opportunity to think about, well, now that we can't really do Mass, what are some of the, some of our other ways of praying? So that's, my 2 cents on that.
Look, once upon a time, a teacher, I was managing and preparing for a liturgy of penance, and I say, look, the confessional, all confessionals, little boxes, take it out. And the teacher says to me, don't, Lalo, don't. See, we don't use them, and nobody confesses nowadays. If you take it out, people we don't know that they are not confessing. Leave it there. Leave it there as a sign that you should do it. And it's the same thing that what Paul is bringing. If we open the doors plenty to the spiritual communication or communion, spiritual communion, without stressing the need of going to Mass, people will do because we are lazy. We have the short way of doing things, and we're going to change the Eucharist for Zoom transmitted liturgy of the Word or Eucharist. So I think it's dangerous, especially with the young people that for them it's too easy. Just understand that what is important is not the body. In this case, it is important the feeling, the signification of what it means to me interiorly.
I was struck, thank you very much for your presentation, and you opened also some aspects of what was happening in families and during this pandemic situation, and which kind of liturgies or paraliturgies was happening inside of families. And do you have some other aspects, what was happening in families? Of course, they were also in Slovakia. They started maybe more carefully using signs inside of families or liturgy of word. And so I was thinking that, well, there is in Jewish tradition those house liturgies or those aspects which can be introduced, and it raised a question that perhaps how we can help kids and in families to introduce some aspects of liturgies. What we learned from pandemic situation for better understanding of liturgy afterwards in church, that how these house liturgies or paraliturgies can help us to go deeper or better introduce families or children to church liturgy.
Yeah. No comments. Just I agree fully with you.
There are some other aspects of what happened in
No, it's. I will say it's almost what you have said. You know, though we have certain practice, for example, one of our priests, with no permission and risking to be taken by the police, he went out and to bless the people from far, you know, not getting close, but to bless the houses. And every house at the door has a little altar, things like that. And the family prepares the altar before. So that things that have been done and risking what we have to risk at that time was important.
A number of years ago at the North American Academy, Teresa Berger gave, she had written, as you know, something on this whole way of being present through the internet. And she went a little further, I think, in that talk. The question of presence, I think, is another question that we probably have all talked about. What does it mean to be present? I've carried on all my work, Zoom work, you know, on the work I'm doing, apart from the any Eucharistic celebrations, on Zoom. And we certainly were present to one another, and we did all our work via Zoom. So there's a presence, a real presence through Zoom. But prayed through it, discussed, we ended with prayer. So my question about presence is really what triggers. Second point, I don't know if you've seen what James Allison does or did or is doing, I think, still, about celebrating the Eucharist together with people and having them having the bread and wine in their homes.
One of the Jesuits did that. But for most of the people, if the Jesuit says, priest says, take this and consecrate it, was real consecration. So, thanks God the bishop didn't know that, but... Well, thank you very much.
One topic that wasn't mentioned was just practical economics. I know where I serve, a lot of the parishes continue to live stream because it's a source of income for the parishes, and many people have not returned, and bills need to be paid. And it's a way that people who are participating virtually are contributing monetarily to parishes. So there's an additional factor there maybe to consider. Also, I think the experience of the pandemic was how we were invited to expand our notion of community, where you had people zooming in, if you will, from different states, from different countries, to participate in local community or virtual community liturgies. Anyway, it's a fascinating topic. Our third short communication will be offered by Roc O'Connor. How do divided Catholics engage Christ in the liturgy?
The only way we engage Christ in the liturgy as divided and divisive people. I'll come to that. I too want to talk about presence, which is, for a number of reasons, has come to be a significant focus of my life. I'm not going to give you any history there. I'm going to talk in somewhat psychological terms. the goal is not to be psychological. The goal is to talk about, this is what I'm exploring, how am I located within the Trinity as I give thanks with Christ in the Spirit to the Father? Where am I located within that? Where am I is, another way to put it. So I'll speak in those terms, maybe using psychological stuff. It could be also understood as looking within. So I've become an introvert over the last 30 years, 40 years, whatever. When Dennis and I were at Berkeley, I didn't operate that way. I certainly do now. Hey, watch it. We deal with universals and particulars, right? And the paradoxes we deal within are universal and particular. There is mind and heart. What we understand, what we teach, what we want people to know, and what we want to evangelize the church and others about liturgy, saying, here's what you need to get, and there is no institute for good study. Pardon me if I get a little intense. And there's that part, and it's the individuals taking in what has been taught. So it's a good old one in the many. There are principles and there are individual experiences of those principles. There's liturgical theology and there's the reception of liturgical theology. Quid recipitur per modum recipiens recipitur. You know that. The mode of my receiving teachings, the mode of my receiving Eucharist, my mode is one. My mode of relating to you as friends, as to God, to myself is one. That's what I propose. So, we, in fact, I'm talking mainly about the U.S. That I know. I don't know other places as well. We receive Eucharist as divided people who foster divisions. We go to communities we like-minded people, or as Sharon Parks termed them, ideologically compatible groups. Could this be a stage of development? That's another question. As a divided, divisive Catholic Jesuit, that's part of describing my location or where I'm situated before the great mystery of God, the great mystery of salvation. When hearing confessions in Milwaukee, we had, there were 4 of us in the community, 4, and we would hear 25 man hours of confessions a week. I was hearing about 5 to 6 a week. 90% were men, 90% of those were dealing with internet porn, and most of those came to confession within a 10-day range. I started to ask them, what do you think drives you? What drives you to seek for relief in that fashion? Well, I don't know. So I proposed often, and this is a guy thing especially, I think, are you inadequate? You feel unworthy, alone and disconnected and afraid. Oh yeah, which is the stuff guys don't like to talk about. Could it be that I would perceive, yes, I would say yes, that their acting out was to take care of that, to gain relief from the pain of inadequacy? And let me suggest that's creaturehood. It's a great thing to say God is our creator, but we're creatures, and that sucks. To be insufficient, inadequate, and afraid. Again, it's the location before God in Christ through the Spirit. How do I recognize this? Well, first of all, I want to say, I'm proposing this stuff, take it or leave it. There are avoidances and attractions. I am attracted to 100 different things. I avoid 150 different things. Most of my avoidances have to do with being a creature. The sheer human vulnerability. I read Ernest Becker. I've read him. I've listened to the book 14 times in the last 10 years. Sebastian Moore, A Crucified Jesus is No Stranger. I've read that 14 times in 12 years. This is the existential place where they go. But avoiding human vulnerability, it's so terrifying. And there are no places, there are few safe places outside 12-step groups where you can talk about this. My attractions are towards security. I want to feel safe. I want to feel accepted. So I go to hang out with people that think like me or were going to like me, or I could manipulate to like me. There's a saying, so at the retreat house, we have 8 12-step retreats a year, and there's a saying in AA, I guess it's before I heard it, you spot it, you got it. What I disdain in others, I got. Whether it's the poor or people of a different political party, what I disdain in others is right here, where I propose. And that's how I'm located with Christ in the Spirit, giving thanks for salvation, saying, yeah. Down, boy. Two things. One is, therefore, the resistance to look within. And really, I want to say this first, that the work of seeing what I avoid here is the same I avoid out there. Who are poor, people who are this or that or the other thing. I told this story at our breakout session about a kid I bullied in 4th grade who had a cleft palate because he was different. And I was afraid of being different. So whether it's going outward or going inward, I think it's the similar path. Resistance is the key. John McMurray has a proposal, something like this, to see what resistance is like. And I won't call any of you up. Say, push down. Push down. You imagine yourself pushing down on someone's hand. Push, 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 push. Okay. Push again. More present. Resist. God, self, and others. Which is, and I take it like this in a Tai Chi thing of ward off, tracing back from the resistance to my heart and gut. Situated before God. Christ in the Spirit to the Father. So Jesus got into one of the boats, this is Luke 5, which was Simon's. Now the Greek word ploion, or boat, we think of a little fishing thing there. In the Septuagint, the Greek Old Testament, ploion refers to the ships of Tarshish, the ships of pride. It's one of the many references in the concordance there. Asked him to pull out from the land, sat down and began to teach the crowds. When he stopped, he said to Simon, put out into the deep water the bathos. Septuagint connects, out of the depths I call to you, O Lord. O Lord, hear my voice. If you but mark iniquity, Lord, who can stand? That's where Peter went, the bathos. And they let down the nets for a catch. And Simon, we know, says, where is this? They caught a large number, tear the nets, and there are many other little things in here. Fill both boats. Simon Peter, or he's named Peter, fell down at Jesus' knees, saying, depart from me, I am a sinful man. Aner hamartolos. In chapter 24, I believe it is, it says, who put Jesus to death? Andres hamartoloi. So Simon Peter's not saying, I have low self-esteem or a bad self-image. He's saying, I will put you to death. The crucified Jesus is no stranger. When Jesus says to him, he said, be not afraid. From now on, you will be catching people alive. This word is used in the Greek of book of Joshua about the what was their name? Rahab. They were saved alive. And it struck me that this is our our Jesuit constitutions. The grace at work to save you will be the one out of which you are most authentically minister. Aided with Christ in the Spirit to the Father. It's about location, 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 I would suggest, which involves learning about where I'm located. So thank you very much.
Very good. Thank you, Roc.